I'm Edward Selfe. I've been living in South Luangwa for more than 10 years. I started working here as an assistant camp manager at a camp called Flat Dogs, and while I was there I learned all about the safari industry, about everything from running camps and looking after guests through to how travel agents work, how the booking process works. It was a really great starting point for working in the safari industry. I first came to Zambia actually in 2004. I've got some friends who live in Lusaka, and I think I always wanted to do this. I always wanted to live in the bush and drive in open-top cars. As many people, grew up watching the Attenborough films, BBC's Attenborough films, and I have him to thank for the inspiration of working on safari. But I guess I thought it was not something that someone from Dorset in the UK would end up doing. So I never really pursued it. In fact, I didn't pursue it at all. But I came here as part of my travels in 2004, and that really got me started on safari, and that made me realise that it was something that possibly I could do, even though I didn't have much of an introduction. I didn't have safari in my family or in my blood, as many people do. So that was my... photography has been in my family for longer. My dad was a photographer, and he taught me when I was young, taught me to take photos. I think I started when I was about 10 with my first camera, and of course I've come a fair way since then, and now I have, we've moved into the digital camera world, and I have some great cameras and some great lenses, and I've turned what was a hobby into my profession, I guess, and I love doing it. My first trip to Africa was in 2004. I came to Zambia. I didn't actually come to South Luangwa, which is where I live now. I did visit the North Luangwa National Park. It was quite early in the year. I came in March and April, so it's not the peak safari season for Zambia, but I was lucky. I went down into the North Luangwa National Park to visit and check on a bush camp that had just sort of come through the rainy season. So we went down to see how it had survived the floods and the rains, and that was a great experience. And I remember, my first encounter with a herd of elephants, and it's actually quite funny. I remember that we were driving down. Of course, I was taking pictures of everything, as you do when you're new in a place, and we saw a roan antelope, and I remember I just leaned out of the car and took a picture, and I think the guys in the car with me were a bit surprised that I wasn't more excited about a roan antelope. Of course, I didn't know anything, but it turned out that was the first time they'd seen a roan antelope in many months. So it was quite funny. I remember that quite clearly. And I also remember getting down to the camp, and we'd camped in tents, and I walked down just a short track, maybe 50 yards or so, down to the edge of the Mwaleshi River, and found a very large snake. Curled up in the classic kind of snake pose on the riverbank in the sun. I'm not sure what kind of snake it was, but I remember that very clearly too. Everything that I do is about trying to give my guests the best experience of the places that I go to. I'm very fortunate that the vast majority of the places where I guide I know extremely well. I mean, I've been living in Luangwa for more than 10 years, so I know every corner of this park really well. So I have that insider's view, which is very beneficial. I feel very lucky to have that. I mean, everything from knowing each and every road, so if I want to get to a certain area, I know how to get there, but also when I walk into a camp, I know all the barmen, and I know the waiters in the camp, I know all the staff, I know the guides there, so it makes me feel very much at home, and it helps me to make my guests feel at home too. Well, I make sure that I chat with the local guides there. I make sure that I check in on the sightings. I find out what's new in the area. Being a guide myself, I know the value of a local guide. I know the value of a guide who knows his area intimately. So I always make sure to spend some time with the guides in that camp, find out what's been going on, and get their perspective on things. They're very kind. All the guides who I meet in Zambia, they're such welcoming people. All the Zambians are welcoming people. So it's really nice to meet them again after some weeks or some months, and chat with them and find out what their experiences have been. It's great to see their passion about what they do as well. I always get a really strong feeling that they love what they're doing and they really enjoy sharing it with their guests. Well, I think the first thing that you notice when you arrive in Zambia is what an amazing, welcoming country it is. From the staff who get you off the plane to the people who issue you with your visa, you'll feel it immediately that Zambia is a very welcoming place. I love that about it. I also love the fact that the safari experience here is very wild. It's small scale, very small camps, often 6, 8, 10, 12 beds, so a very exclusive experience. And the camps are really in the thick of the wild areas. There's no fences, there's no separation between the accommodation and the animals. It's a very immersive experience. It's very common, in fact, nearly always will guests have elephants, hippos, antelope in their camp while they're staying there. And it's something, of course, we get used to. We see it every day, but it never gets boring. There's something different. It feels different to have wildlife in the camp around you. When you go out in the vehicle, when you go out on safari, you expect it. You'd be disappointed if you didn't find a lot of wildlife. But people always remark on the really memorable experiences of sitting outside their tent or outside their chalet on the riverbank and having an elephant come past. And it sort of feels different when it comes into your space rather than you going into their space. And that's something which I really enjoy about Zambia and about Zambian camps. And we also have incredible wildlife and incredible habitats here. Particularly when people come and visit the Luangwa, they always comment about it's extraordinary that on one morning drive you can feel like you've gone through 3 or 4 different national parks. That's very special, and I love that about Zambia. Across the Luangwa there's diversity, but across the whole country there's huge diversity. We have some big river valleys like the Zambezi and the Luangwa, but we also have some highland areas, some forest areas, some amazing 19 different national parks, and they're very different. There's huge diversity there. So you could spend a month in Zambia or 2 months in Zambia and visit a whole range of different habitats, and you'd get a very varied safari experience. You can't really go wrong in Zambia. Zambia is very wild, it's very untouched, so generally whichever national park, whichever area you go to, you're going to get a great experience. Zambia's got a very strong tradition of great standards of guiding, so when you meet guides in whichever area you go to, they will meet you and show you around with the passion of their area and with good knowledge behind it as well. So you can't really go wrong with Zambia. There's something to see or do pretty much any month of the year. Some national parks are better set up for rainy season visits than others. The Luangwa is fantastic, particularly the South Luangwa is fantastic in the rainy season. We've got a certain number of all-weather roads which can be accessed and driven on at any time of the year. And in the rainy season, the river comes up considerably, so boating safaris on the Luangwa River are very rewarding as well. You've also got out in western Zambia, you've got the upper course of the Zambezi River, which floods out onto the Liwa Plains. That's a beautiful and very unusual habitat out there, huge numbers of wildebeest. Hyenas are the top predators there. That's a very unusual reversal. We normally think about lions as being the top predators with the hyenas as the scavengers, but there it's somehow reversed. So there's great diversity in Zambia. You can't really go wrong with visiting Zambia at any time of the year. However, the classic safari time is any time between May and October. The end of the season, September and October, is very concentrated game along the last of the waterways. Earlier in the season, May, June, the game is more dispersed. I like it from a photographic point of view at any time of the year, but particularly that early period. The light is strong, it's fantastic for backlight, it's great for high contrast images. I also like later in the year the dust and the rich numbers of game along the river. The interactions between predator and prey, even between different predators, is very exciting. So any time between May and October, I'd very highly recommend coming to Zambia. It's fantastic. I also remember a great walking experience. Somehow walking safaris often have the most memorable events in them. And I remember finding a leopard up a tree on a walk, and the leopard was very engaged with a whole troop of baboons which were under the tree. So the leopard was constantly looking one way. So we managed to walk in really quite close on the other side of the tree, and we were looking at the back of the leopard and the back of its head. And one of the guests that I was with really wanted to get a photo, of course, very exciting experience, very good memory. So I just said to him, okay, I'm going to stand where I am. The scout was slightly in front of us. I'm going to stand where I am. Just come a few steps in front of me, take your photo, and then we'll try and turn and pull out of the sighting without disturbing the leopard. But unfortunately, this guy, in his excitement, he was so exciting, he was shaking with excitement. He tripped on something on the ground, and it was almost a comedy trip. He almost sort of lost his balance and fell forward, but he managed to catch himself. But he made quite a lot of noise doing it. And the poor leopard, who had no idea we were there, did a kind of comedy Tom and Jerry, like he'd been electrocuted. And all his hair stood up on end. He jumped up on the branch, and he turned around and looked at us, and you could see the confusion on his face about how on earth this little group of 4 people had managed to get so close to him without him knowing. Sometimes animals do really goofy things. Anyway, he sat and he looked at us for a little while, but then he decided that he wasn't very happy with us, and he came down the tree and off he went. But it was very memorable. The poor man, he was so apologetic, but of course it didn't matter at all. And he and I, we both have a story we'll never forget. So at the moment we're dealing with this very, very difficult global situation with coronavirus, which has affected every single corner of every single business in the world. We find ourselves in lockdown, where people can't travel, people can't go on safari, people can't visit the places they like to visit, people can't fulfill their planned safaris. A lot of people are in lockdown in their own countries, unable to leave their houses, unable to visit their families. It's a very, very stressful situation, very worrying for a lot of people. In Zambia, particularly here in a very wild area, our experience of coronavirus lockdown is rather different. We live in an area of very low population density. It's very much easier for us to keep ourselves to ourselves. We are fortunate that we're able to go out into wild areas without interacting with anybody else to do so. So in the same way that people in Europe and America are allowed to go out for exercise and for recreation, observe social distancing, we are able to access the South Luangwa National Park without interacting with anybody else and while maintaining social distancing. And that is an extremely fortunate situation to be in, and we absolutely don't take that for granted. So my days are spent in large part out in nature in the national park. Largely that is because that's my job and my life, but also I feel we have a responsibility to spend time in the national park, to keep an eye on what's going on here, to ensure we maintain our anti-poaching presence, maintain our monitoring of the roads and wildlife. The other half of my life at the moment is spent trying to do the best we can for our guests. Of course, I had a large number of safaris booked for the 2020 season, none of which it seems are going to be able to go ahead, or perhaps some later in the year. Given that that is the case, I've been doing my best to work with the camps here and with my guests to generally to postpone safaris to 2021. I'm so very grateful to the camps and the operators in Zambia who have, without question and without exception, been very accommodating to postpone safaris, allow us to move dates, allow us to be incredibly flexible to do the best we can for our guests. And that is really telling of the safari industry in Zambia, that every camp, every operator is wanting to do the very best they can for guests. And that's amazing, and I couldn't have asked for more. So yeah, that's what I've been working on in these difficult times. I've been a lot of sadness, a lot of disappointment for me and for guests, my guests primarily, that they can't fulfill the trips that they wanted to. Some have been built around wedding anniversaries, have been built around big birthdays. Of course, we're going to have to push those back a year and try and delay the celebrations, but we'll celebrate it next year, whatever those events are. But I'm really grateful to the guests for being flexible, and to the safari operators here for allowing us that flexibility. It's been incredible. So 2020 may be a difficult year. It will be a difficult year. It's very tricky for the operators here to pay their staff, look after the livelihoods of their staff when they're not getting any income. So I'm really grateful to them for being able to be flexible with my bookings and allow me to move my trips to next year as much as possible. We would normally in May be gearing up for the safari season, and camps would be opening. There would be a hustle and bustle. There would be the excitement of the new season coming along, people looking forward to, perhaps those who are seasonally employed, looking forward to getting back to work. There's what I always refer to as the promise of the new season. It's very noticeable when that's coming along. We always notice it. The day is getting shorter, the weather cools, it's cold in the mornings, it's drying up, the roads are beginning to open up again, the lagoons are receding, the river's dropping. It's a very exciting time, and we always look forward to it after the end of the season. Through the rains, we really look forward to this time. Of course, this year it's very different. I notice it even from my house. Where we live, we're 500-600 meters from the main road that leads to the national park, and normally by now we would be hearing the sound of cars and vehicles and trucks and tractors coming and going from the entrance to the park as they head in to open up camps and grade roads and deliver staff and supplies into the bush camps. And it's quiet. It's really quiet here. There's none of that bustle, there's none of that excitement. It's not to say it's all doom and gloom, it's not. The Zambian people are very resilient, they're very tough. There's a very upbeat feeling in the village. People are they're aware that this is a tough time, the year is going to be really difficult. But they're upbeat, they know that this will pass, they know that safari will return to Zambia. It's been extraordinary that operators in this area have put together packages for their staff. Of course, they're not able to pay full salaries. No one could expect them to. But the operators here, their staff are their families, and they have all put together a stipend per month, which might not allow the families to do everything that they want to do, but it allows them to survive, to look after their families, to look after their extended families, which is the way things work here. And it's extraordinary, it's amazing, and it's really an indication of the strong family feel that safari has in this area, that operators have been able to do that and have chosen to do it. And I think it's a lifeline that the whole community here will benefit from this year. Of course, if we pare it down to basics, if operators are able to pay their staff a salary, it enables those staff to feed their families rather than having to rely on natural resources. Traditionally, people here would have lived off the land. And of course that's fine when people live in small numbers, but as the safari industry grows here, it has allowed quite a population to develop in this area, and has encouraged a great economy here, and that's fantastic. But when that economy stops, people may be tempted to turn to traditional methods of harvesting from local resources, and that might include cutting down trees either to farm in those areas or to make timber products, or even to fish and go poaching in local areas. So that lifeline that the camps have been able to offer their people is very important, and it's something that we're really grateful to them for. I sit on the board of Conservation South Luangwa, which is a fantastic local NGO which, along with the National Parks Authority here, spearheads anti-poaching and law enforcement for the whole of the central and southern part of the Luangwa Valley. And we're working very closely with the operators to make sure that the anti-poaching effort is targeted and maintained during this period. Of course, tourism is a big source of funding for anti-poaching, and without tourism in this area, the anti-poaching effort is at risk. So we're very aware of that. But as an organisation, as CSL, we are taking steps to maintain our anti-poaching and our law enforcement work, and we're confident we can do that. But yeah, it's a very different season. It has a very different feel to it this year. Of course, it's still beautiful. It's still the South Luangwa. It's still full of game. There's still a lot going on. But from a tourism point of view, it's a very different year for sure. It's very interesting because Zambia has a totally different economy, totally different population demographic, and therefore a totally different response to coronavirus. Firstly, Zambia is not really in a position to enforce a lockdown. Most people don't have the ability to stay within their houses or in their own personal space. We tend to have houses very close together in villages, very little personal space. A lot of intergenerational families living together, so it's harder to protect the elderly because the elderly are mixing together with the kids and the youngsters. Also, people don't have access to freezers and refrigeration. They also don't have funding readily available to go shopping for a week or 2 weeks food supplies. So the reality of things here is that lockdown is not really a possibility. People need to go out every day to go and buy fresh food, fresh vegetables, even to buy meat and dairy products as well. They can't store them at home. So it's not really possible to enforce the kind of lockdowns, the kind of very tight restrictions that have been enforced in Europe and America. It is also true that people don't travel around Zambia in the way that people travel around Europe. People think nothing of getting on a flight in Europe and travelling from one country to another, or within the UK from getting on a flight from London to Edinburgh and going for meetings or for a weekend. So the spread of the virus is, someone describes it like more like little fires. So you have a fire and it burns, and then an ember will jump from one area to another, and that starts another little fire somewhere until that fire burns out. So it's a very different kind of experience of the virus here. It means that Zambia is much more likely to live with the virus rather than trying to lock it down, control it and eradicate it. If you don't have a very developed healthcare service, or you don't have an aging population, the implications of living with the virus is less damaging than it is for European countries, where an aging population which would get very sick and overwhelm the healthcare service is a very big risk. So it's a totally different experience that we're having with the virus here. Of course, we have to consider the high prevalence of people with immunodeficiencies here, and we have to take very good care of them. There's been fantastic initiatives to produce double-layer cotton masks, and a local organisation called Tribal Textiles has been very instrumental in churning out thousands of masks which have been spreading through the local council for local communities, and that's been a great initiative. And a lot of other local organisations and charities are joining that effort, which is really fantastic. I mentioned earlier that also local tourism operators have put in place salary packages, stipends for their staff, which they're paying them every month to help them get through this really, really difficult year. That's a massive help for the local community because it allows people to continue to buy food, it allows them to be secure on food, allows them not to go poaching, not to risk living off local resources, natural resources, which is great. So there's quite a number of quite localised but very important projects which are being run to help local people through this really difficult time. Stay safe, don't do anything that risks personal health, but as soon as you can, travel. Please come and visit these areas. I've seen firsthand, living here in Zambia, what happens when you turn off that flow of foreign income into Zambia. It has put the whole industry, the whole economy on hold here. Zambia hasn't seen this before. No country has seen what happens when you turn off the tap of foreign income, and it's dramatic. The flow of income into Zambia has stopped. In the South Luangwa, it's $30 million a year comes in through foreign investment, foreign tourism, and that's huge. And when you turn that off, that money stops coming to the camps. The camps stop being able to pay their workers as much as they normally do. Those workers stop shopping in the local villages. They stop buying fuel from the fuel station. They stop travelling to local towns. So shops can't pay their staff, taxi drivers aren't operating, the whole economy is shutting down. So please, postpone your trip, don't cancel it, and travel as soon as it's safe to do so. Please come and travel and visit these areas. It's the very best way to support them, protect them, help the funding of the anti-poaching work that's being done in this area. That's my suggestion, my recommendation, my request to the whole of the travel industry. I mentioned earlier that also local tourism operators have put in place salary packages, stipends for their staff, which they're paying them every month to help them get through this really, really difficult year. That's a massive help for the local community because it allows people to continue to buy food, it allows them to be secure on food, allows them not to go poaching, not to risk living off local resources, natural resources, which is great. So there's quite a number of quite localized but very important projects which are being run to help local people through this really difficult time. That's an easy question. Living in Zambia, running a photographic safari combines so many things that I love. I love the outdoors. I love nature. I get nourished by nature. For me, sitting outside, watching nature with my binoculars, I don't even need my camera. I love my camera. I love taking photos. I love what we can do for conservation and the natural world with photos. But really what I love is nature. I see myself as a guide and as a photographic guide much more than I see myself as a photographer, and the reason I say that, the reason I make that distinction is that what I love is the chance to take people out into nature, help them to see and find and enjoy things they might not notice or find or understand for themselves. I love using my knowledge and my experience with nature and wildlife to read a situation, put me and my guests and their cameras into a situation, into the position to record fantastic behavior, great moments, great memories into images. At this time, at the moment, I'm going out with my camera on my own because I don't have any guests. There aren't any guests in Zambia, there aren't any visitors. And I love that too. I love the chance to take people with me, show them what I know, show them this place, introduce them to the wonders and the beauty of Zambia. That's what I thrive on, that's what I love, that's what keeps me doing this every day. Keeps me getting up at 4:30 in the morning, dragging my guests up early in the morning, giving them early breakfast and getting us out into the bush early in the morning when the light hasn't even come up yet. I love the chance to show Zambia to people. That's what I love about this place. That's what I love about what I do, and that's what I'm very fortunate that I found myself doing a job that I love. I think I'm very lucky for that, and I appreciate it every day. And I really look forward to the return of visitors and guests to Zambia so I can go back to doing that and to showing people around, particularly around the South Luangwa, but around Kafui, around the Lower Zambezi, around Kasanka, around Lua Plains, all these wonderful, wonderful national parks that we have in Zambia. So I hope that coronavirus passes. I hope we get used to the new normal, whatever that is, whether we have to live with coronavirus or whether we are able to eradicate it through vaccines and then go back to some kind of normal that we had before. But whichever it is, I look forward to that. I look forward to the opening of borders safely. I look forward to people being able to travel back to Zambia and to all the wild places that they love. And I look forward to being able to show people nature again and bring them back to the national parks and to Zambia. So bring on 2021. I hope it's 2021. I hope it's the end of 2020, but whatever it is, I look forward to that.